Casey's like, oh, wow. Strong job.
All right, everyone. Well, welcome. I'd like to start on time. I know there are people with commitments immediately afterward. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for coming out. This event is sponsored by the Economics Reading Group. I recognize a lot of faces from the group. The Economics Reading Group here at SFA has been a thing since the fall of 2011. We cover a book per long semester. We have two $1,000 scholarships that we give out every year, door prizes, and usually we have food at our events. But this is a bit of a spin-off, if you will. We've been doing these conversations with the authors. This is actually our second one. The normal format for the group is we have an assigned reading. We read, we come together, and we discuss the reading. This is the complete opposite. And so we have this fantastic opportunity, I think, to hear from Melina Palmer. Melina is a podcaster, a creator. She's a personality. She has a business where she consults businesses on how to use economics to improve their bottom line. And so I think this is a real opportunity for us all to learn something practical, and especially if you have a business or if you've ever thought about running a business. So we're going to let her tell us about what it is she does and her book and her experiences with in the realm of it's called experimental economics, which sounds kind of intimidating, but it shouldn't be. And I think that her book does a good job of laying that out. So without further ado, Melina, thank you so much for giving us your time. The students are excited. I'm excited. I'm just going to turn things over to you, and you can take it away. I've heard that feedback is welcome. From time to time, she may call on us for some responses. I always prefer an interactive discussion. We'll see how it goes, and then there will be time at the end for your personal questions. So if you develop some questions, please feel free to voice those toward the end. You don't have to worry about being on camera. Without further ado, Melina, thank you, and I'll get out of the way.
Well, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Great to be with everyone. As he said, I can't see you, but I know that you should be able to see me now. Going to be talking through a presentation around my book, What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You, and my work as an applied behavioral economist or, experimental economist as well, and the work that I do. And I look forward to answering questions from you as well as we go. So first, always like to start off with what the heck is behavioral economics, especially for people who aren't familiar as we get started here. I like to say that if traditional economics and psychology had this adorable baby, we would have behavioral economics. And really the reason that the field came about is because traditional economics assumes logical people making rational choices in everything that they do. And because we're all humans, we know that's not really the world that we live in. And so, we end up where we know we should eat healthy and exercise, but perhaps we decide to binge watch Netflix and eat a giant bag of Cheetos on a Friday night instead, or whatever that happens to be. So what you had over time is that these economic models didn't accurately predict behavior. They were saying things that people should do, but not what they actually do. And so over time, you had economists and psychologists, neuroscientists, either working together on projects or entering into one another's fields to try and see if there were these common threads with the brain that could be used to better predict behavior. And thankfully, there are many of them, and that's how behavioral economics was born. And if you're wondering, why do I care? I mean, I know that you're in school now, but you might have an idea of an industry or business that you want to be getting into. And maybe you don't think that this is something that matters to you, but behavioral economics, while it is a newer industry, it is definitely one on the rise. At the end of 2019, when Bloomberg announced their top jobs for this decade we are in now. Behavioral scientist was number one on the list, even ahead of data analyst. And so it is something that all the top companies in the world either already have teams that are incorporating behavioral sciences. They might be calling them a nudge unit, or they have chief behavioral officers, or they work with consultants like myself to make sure that they're properly communicating with the brains of their customers or with their teams. So this first book I have is What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You. My second that's coming out in the fall is What Your Employees Need and Can't Tell You. It's all about communicating with people. And if you're a human and intend to be doing work with humans into the future, this is important stuff to know. And good thing is, though, it is, like I said, it's still pretty new. So being a student, you have a lot of opportunity, if this is something you're interested in, to be able to kind of chart your own path. So when we think about testing and things like this, it may seem intimidating, but there are really small tests that are able to make a really big difference. Like several years ago, Netflix started doing some testing in their behavioral teams to see how a single image could impact the likelihood that someone would choose a show and then stay within Netflix. So the right image could increase likelihood of clicks by as much as 30%. These are all pretty similar, but that shift makes a difference, and understanding behavior is a piece of that. We also have simplicity at Amazon. I'm sure you're familiar with this sort of scenario here, but you might not realize that that buy now button is something that Amazon actually patented back in 1999. They were the only company that was able to have a single click buying system. And so their competitors, including Barnes and Noble, had to add in this extra friction or sludge where people have to say, are you sure, or are you ready, or this extra step in the process. May not seem like that big of a deal. It's just one more thing, one more step, one more form, one more question. But it was so impactful that Steve Jobs actually paid $1 million to Amazon to be able to have one-click buying in iTunes. So to reduce a single click, he paid $1 million. If you think about all those extra little elements where you could be reducing that friction, making it easier to do business with you, can really help to have a better working relationship. We'll talk about that a little bit here as we go through the presentation as well. So before we get into some concepts, I would like to talk about how the brain really works. And so one psychologist has recommended this analogy of thinking about the brain like a person riding an elephant. You have your conscious, logical rider. It knows where it wants to go. There's a path. We've got a plan, and it knows what's going to happen. But it is at the mercy of that subconscious elephant. And if the elephant decides it wants to go in a different direction, it wants to sit down, you can't pull or push or logic it into going where you want to go. It's better to motivate the elephant and know that the rider will explain why that was a really good idea in the end. So when we think about our brains and how they work, just take a minute here. We'll just take a second. Think about your brain. What does it actually do? You don't have to shout this one out. I'll have shout outs in a moment, but I'm guessing that even where I said, for you to think about that for a moment, maybe you let your mind wander for a second, because our brains do get to be pretty lazy when thinking about things. But anything that you could have thought about, anything that comes to mind when you're thinking about thinking, you're aware of thinking, is stuff in that cognitive conscious processing space. So we do also have, as I said, this subconscious. And now here's a point where we can have some shout outs here. What percentage of the brain's processing do you think is subconscious? Would you say 25, 50, 75%? Any numbers we want to throw out?
75.
90%.
Okay. I heard a 75 and a 90. I assume, I'm hopeful there are more than two people in the room. I don't know.
50%.
All right. I know, like I said, I can't see anybody. So we're still learning a lot about the brain. And so we don't know exact numbers on this. The highest I've seen someone claim on this puts it at 99.999 Yikes. Which for anyone whose brain didn't want to do the quick math on that, that would be as little as 0.001 being on a conscious level. Most agree that 95% is a pretty good number here. And like I said, there's a lot to learn, but the point is there's a ton that is happening in that subconscious processing. And if we don't think about communicating with that elephant, we are making things just a whole lot harder for ourselves. And so if you think about how this works, how the brain is processing information, I like to think about it like a receptionist if you're trying to get a meeting with a busy executive. That subconscious is constantly scanning the world around saying, I have a rule for that. I know how to do that. Normal, normal, normal. And whenever there's anything a little bit out of the ordinary, it'll flag the conscious brain to step up and do something. And if you think about when you first learned to drive a car, it was really difficult and tedious and slow and confusing and stressful trying to think about where your hands go and what the pedals do. But the last time you drove a car, it was probably pretty easy. You didn't have to think about it at all. We've all had those moments where we get home at the end of a long day and say, oh, I don't even remember how I got here. It's not that your brain wasn't making those same decisions, but they've moved into this subconscious habitual processing space. So when you don't have to think about it until maybe you're driving over a mountain pass in the pouring rain between a semi-truck and a guardrail in the middle of the night, and then you feel everything kind of slow way down and you have to focus again, as that's kind of this literal handoff to your conscious brain. So it'd also be like if you're looking for a new address and you feel like you need to turn down the radio to be able to process the information. It seems very silly, but it's because the conscious just can't handle that much information at once. So if we were to compare it to a computer, which is something people like to do often, the subconscious elephants can process about 11 million bits of information per second. Compare that to the conscious brain, which can do about 40. Not a great ratio that we have there. Again, even if this is 40,000, it would still be a terrible ratio. So as we learn more and more things, we know that communicating with that elephant is the most important thing. There are many, many concepts that I could have talked about with you today. We're not going to get into all of these. Many of them have episodes on my podcast or referenced in the book. But we have a specific few instead of the hundreds that we're going to dig in on. So with this, when you think about applying behavioral economics as you're thinking about what you're going to do in business as you go out into the world, I like to use this analogy of behavioral baking, which if you were going to just open up a bakery, the first thing you would probably need to do, we assume you know nothing about baking today, that you need to know the ingredients, the basic ones at least, what they do, how they work together. So sugar, butter, flour, and eggs can combine in many different ways to make all sorts of different things, but you have to have some understanding of them so you don't try to put 3 cups of sugar and a tablespoon of flour and hope it's going to become a cake, right? That would be a pretty bad situation. You also need to know what you want to make before you start the process. Similarly, you can't just throw everything in a bowl and hope it becomes cupcakes. I mean, I guess you can, but again, it's probably not going to work out all that well. And so you want to have a plan of what you want to make and then some sort of recipe to get there. You're probably going to start with like a box cake mix to be something really simple as you're getting familiar and comfortable. And even when you have some failures along the way, you would never say, I tried baking once and it didn't work. Baking's not real, right? That's a ridiculous thing to say, but we do that sort of thing all the time in business where someone will say, I tried Instagram once and didn't get 1 million followers overnight. That's not a real strategy. That can't work. And with something like behavioral economics or anything else, you might say, I tried that once and it didn't work out. But if you follow a recipe and know that it's going to be this continual process of testing, just like if you were learning to bake, if the cake comes out dense or soupy, you're going to learn from it, ask some questions, maybe do a little bit of research, and then try again until you perfect that skill. And it would be the same with applying behavioral economics or really anything else that you're learning in school. So my book follows a recipe of sorts for this. We can't get into all of these today, but some we'll talk about are the problem that you're solving, how you can showcase things as the best choice, and talking a little bit about nudging people as you go. So we always start with what problem you are solving. If you learn nothing else from this, please take away that the biggest thing that everyone gets wrong in business is understanding the problem, not spending enough time thinking about the problem before you jump in and try to solve whatever that problem is. It is really easy to find the right answer to the wrong question, and companies waste way too much time and money on not properly understanding the problem, where you'd say, we just, the price is too high, or we need more customers. That's not necessarily the problem, but you could spend a lot of time trying to solve it if you don't spend enough time thinking about it. And to help make this case, I always go to Einstein, who was asked if he had an hour to save the world, how would he spend his hour? To which he said he would spend 55 minutes understanding the problem and 5 minutes solving it. We all know Einstein was a very, very smart man. If he was going to spend 55 minutes of his hour thinking about the problem, just consider the last project you worked on, whether you're already working in a role somewhere or for a project. You know, how much of your respective hour did you spend thinking about the problem before just jumping into problem solving mode and saying, this is it, this is how we move forward? Through our time in school today, we're given a lot of time dedicated to finding a right answer, and there always is one. But truly, there is a lot of value in asking questions, even when they aren't being dedicated to finding an answer. I work with companies on a process of question storming instead of brainstorming, which we don't have time to talk about really today. But just know that questioning what the real problem is a really great space to be investing time. Another book that I really highly recommend is one by a man named Warren Berger that's called A More Beautiful Question, for anyone who's interested in innovation and disruption, things like that, and the power of questions. I highly recommend that one. So as an example of how you can use this, I love this concept of the Literary, which is a company that started in Sweden. And they took something that many people have struggled with and have found a new answer. And I like to take this as this kind of statement of saying change is hard. You know, how many of you would agree where I say change is hard? And don't be swayed by what we're talking about here in the presentation. So who agrees with that? If you can shout it out. Just a yes.
I do. Change is hard.
Yeah. But does it have to be? Is it always hard? Not necessarily, right? If we're trying to change the natural rules of the brain, yeah, that's really hard. But when you can work with existing rules, change can actually become quite easy. And in the case of the Literary, they took on this task of helping people to properly throw away and sort their garbage every single time. If I told you that your new job was to do that, to get people to properly throw away and sort their garbage, and you can't do anything else until you have fixed this problem in the world, do you feel like you're basically doomed and this is the rest of your life and your children's children are going to be working on the same thing, perhaps? And how might you go about trying to solve this problem? You might think that people just need to understand what's wrong. They need to know what's going on. We need another brochure. They just don't understand how they should throw things away and what can be composted versus recycled. If they knew more, or if they saw one more video of a turtle with a straw up its nose, they would be convinced and they would take the right action. But that logic, again, doesn't work. You're thinking about the rider and not the elephant. And it doesn't really motivate people to make a change. And so what the Literary has done is turned litter into lottery tickets. hence the name. And so if you throw away and properly sort the garbage, they've created these smart garbage cans that can scan the information that goes in. If you throw something away properly, you get a notification that you've been entered into a lottery and that you can win a prize. And they're partnering with municipalities, so you could win millions in this case. And they tested in movie theaters, which if it's been a while since you've been to one, are pretty gross places where people feel it's okay to just leave litter everywhere and sticky floors and things like that. But they tested in 4 movie theaters across Sweden for 30 days and had 100% compliance of people throwing away everything they had. They also saw people running through the aisles trying to find trash someone might have left behind because there was 1 ticket per piece of trash. And, women rifling through their bags trying to see if they had extra tissues or things to throw away. No one had to be told what to do. They knew what to do. They just had to be properly motivated to take the action and do something. And yes, you have to separate your own intention as the person who is passionate about this problem and be okay with them doing it for a selfish reason. They're doing that so they can win a prize. In the case of the movie theater test, it was only 5,000 euro if you won. But that's still a lot of money for throwing away a bottle or a cup, right? And it totally feels worth it. It's very different. It was easy to make the change when people were properly motivated. Another great example is one of Shape-a. This is a scale where one would weigh themselves. And you may notice it has no numbers. There's nothing on it at all. And they don't use numbers with Shape-a. It's a color system because standing on the scale helps you to lose weight, but knowing your weight can actually keep you from losing weight. And so instead, it's doing this process of algorithms and things behind the scenes to help you feel like it's okay to step on that scale. And then the colors tell you if you're on track or if you've lost a little or gained a little, and they're helping people to lose weight without having to know what their weight is. So this is all a piece of reframing the problem, understanding and thinking about the problem in a different way. And framing is a really important concept in behavioral sciences. It's that how you say something is much more important than what you are actually saying. So we've got another opportunity here for a shout out moment. So I want you to imagine, you're going to be making spaghetti tonight. So you have to pop over to the grocery store and pick up some ground beef. There are 2 stacks almost identical. The only difference is that one is labeled as 90% fat-free and the other is 10% fat. Now, which one do you want to buy? Which one feels more compelling? Gut instinct.
90%.
90%.
Right. I have given this presentation to thousands of people around the world. Everyone always says 90% fat-free is the one that feels better and that they want to buy. Logically, we know it's the same, right? We know it's the same thing, but it just feels so much better, right? 90% fat-free feels like this healthy decision you're making for yourself. And 10% fat, you're like, ugh, I haven't been to the gym in like 2 years. I was locked up in my house. This sounds terrible. I don't know what I'm going to do. Again, same thing, but how we hear it makes a difference. So when you think about your own messaging, if you're trying to, persuade, if you do any sort of presentations, or when you go and you're doing interviews for jobs, or as you get into roles and you're doing communications or marketing or whatever role you choose, you may be doing everything right, except you're talking about whatever the concept is as 10% fat. And if you would just reframe it and message it a little bit differently and talk about it in terms of 90% fat-free, things would work so much easier for you. And there's a lot of opportunity as well in an industry where everyone is talking in 10% fat terms. If you're the one talking in 90% fat free, people will naturally choose you over competition. So here's an example for a financial institution I did a project for. They had a new checking account product, rewards checking. They were super excited to be promoting. This was the actual message they wanted to put on all their billboards and all their communication for the new checking account. Who's super excited about, you're driving down the freeway, this was in Southern California, and you see this big message that says, earn 1.26% APY for up to $25,000 in balances. Probably not like turning a lot of heads, right? Even if you understand the math, it's just that's a, like, I told you our brains are lazy. Like, I'll think about that later, right? I don't want to deal with that. And so I got them to reframe this messaging. And instead we said, did your checking account pay you $315 last year? This is, of course, the 1.26% at the 25,000 over a year, but it's something that you can really easily say yes or more likely no when you see it. And then you're curious and go, and who's talking about that? Right? I would like an extra $315 for my checking account. I want to learn more about this. They didn't have to spend any more money or put ads in any new places. And they enjoyed a 60% increase in their month over month account openings when we started running these ads. So again, how you say something is more important than what you're saying. And very small changes can make a big difference. That's one of the big lessons from behavioral economics. The average person makes 35,000 decisions every single day. And if you focus on those micro moments of decisions, it can help to make it so we get some of these nudgeable moments. I'll talk about that here in just a second. So once you understand the problem, you need to know what you want people to do. And you don't want to have too many things that you're encouraging people to do at once, because we get overwhelmed easily and our brains get distracted. But one thing that's really important to note is that we are a herding species. And so we like to do what others like us have done. This is why social proof, things like star reviews and testimonials and ratings and things being listed as most popular are compelling to us. It's because we know that other people like us have done this before. It helps us to make a decision. So it's really important to make sure you use your herds in the right way. So you don't want to say, even if you find shocking stats that say things like, 66% of people don't have $500 saved in the case of an emergency, which is something that financial institutions like to share a lot as they're trying to encourage people to save. The problem is you see things like that and the average consumer will think, oh, well, if no one else has money saved, I'm just like everybody else. I don't need to change my behavior because you're part of the herd and that feels safe. Feels like the shocking statistics should make a difference if you were communicating with those riders. But for the elephants, it's nice to be a part of that herd. So it's important to make sure that you use social proof in the right way. And marking something as most popular on a restaurant menu in a case where it actually was the most popular increased likelihood of it being chosen by as much as 20%. And so, if you could just, it seems like we shouldn't have to say those things, but when you put them in the right spot, it can definitely encourage behavior. And again, doesn't have to cost a lot of money. So one of the other concepts that I want to talk about is one of priming, which is that something that happens just before a decision can be very impactful on the choice that we make. It's important to note that this is impacted by all sorts of, all of our senses. So smells and imagery and word choice and things all have an impact. As an example, there was a gas station that wanted to sell more coffee. And so they had the scent of coffee brewing by the gas pumps, and the sales of coffee went up by about 300%. So the right prime can impact behavior. And it is important to know that our brains are very literal. Some studies have shown, say if there's a backpack in a room, people are more cooperative than when there are briefcases in the room. And when you have people doing word searches with terms that are about being elderly and bingo and Florida or whatnot, they walked slower out of the room when they left. Not all of these have properly and fully replicated, but the point to know is that there's this really literal association within the brain in the decisions that we make, and using that to be really thoughtful about word choice, image choice, scents that are around the music that's playing. When French music was playing, people were more likely to buy French wine than the times when they had German music playing and they chose German wines. And across every single study, and there are thousands of them, people never noticed the prime. They didn't pay attention. They didn't see it, but it impacted their behavior. So even if people tell you they don't read ads or whatever it is, their subconscious filter is still processing it, and it does influence behavior. All right. So our next concept here, and we're going to do another test project sort of thing here with some shout outs, is how you can showcase something when you know that it's your best choice. So here we're going to do another test, and I trust you to not be Googling. The intent here is that you shouldn't know the answer, and we're just going to experience this together. All right. So here we go. Are there more or less than 100,000 penguins in Antarctica?
Less.
Okay, we hear less. And so how many do we think they are? Give me some numbers.
6,000.
Okay.
20,000.
We have 6,000, we have 20,000.
All right. So we have 6,000, 20,000. There are, any other guesses?
1,000.
10,000.
There are about 12 million penguins in Antarctica. All right. Should we try another one? Are there more or less than 25 million polar bears in the world?
Less.
All right. And how many do we think there are?
10 million.
Okay, we got a 10 million, I heard.
40,000.
40,000.
40,000, okay.
Somewhere in the thousands.
Somewhere in the thousands.
There are many of them. All right. So there are, it's not known for sure. There are as little as somewhere between like 12 and 30, but 26,500 is sort of this accepted average of how many polar bears there are left in the world today. And, if we go off the first answer that came out as 10 million and thinking back to with the, the penguins, and the numbers were much lower than the 12 million that are really there, you have this thought of what the heck happened? Maybe you've watched some Planet Earth or, Discovery Channel or whatnot, and should know perhaps how many are out there. But this is a concept of anchoring and adjustment. So if you recall, in the penguin example, I asked about 100,000 penguins. And my intent here was knowing that it was going to be an anchor for you. It was going to impact the choice you make. So your brain says, maybe you would start to think about estimating and coming up with this answer. But it uses this rule of thumb, the subconscious, to make a choice saying, this lady probably knows something about penguin populations, which is why she's putting this out in front of me. I've already said, I think it's less than 100,000. And here's the number I'm going to do. Or even if you would have said more, maybe you would have said 250,000 or whatever it is, but you're going off of that anchor I set for you. Do you think your answer would have been different if I would have said 25 million on penguins and 100,000 on polar bears? Or if I had asked if there were more or less than 1 billion penguins in Antarctica, how different would your answers have been? It's because of this anchoring and adjustment and knowing that it's not just numbers, but this is one of the easier ways to explain the concept. And so numbers can have a really big impact. One of my favorite examples being something that was done in a grocery store. They had two different end cap displays. One that said Snickers bars by them for your freezer. The other saying Snickers bars by 18 for your freezer. I think most people can agree that 18 is a lot of Snickers bars and more than most of us are probably buying ever. Even, pandemic stock ups probably weren't getting that many Snickers bars. And if you were creating the ad, you might feel a little bit uneasy about putting 18 on there. It's an arbitrary number. You don't want someone to have to ask how you came up with it or to have to justify it. And your logical writer conscious brain is going to say, them is unlimited and people could get 100 Snickers bars if they wanted. And it might not feel like it would make that much of a difference anyway. But, because I'm talking about it, it obviously did. And there was a 38% increase when the number 18 was used instead of the word them. And it's not that there's anything magical about the number itself, but it is this concept being used and understanding how anchoring impacts behavior. So one, being that the anchoring does work as a prime because it happens just before you're going to make the decision. And in the case of buying, them isn't this unlimited thing. It's actually more like a fancy word for zero when you're going in if you weren't planning to buy anything. And we'll say maybe you get 2. But when you see the number 18, you instead have this moment of 18. way better than everybody else. I don't need 18 Snickers. I'll just get 6. Right. So we had the anchor. It changed the behavior and the decision that we made. There's also a slight shift in the question that's being asked behind the statements here. In the case of them, you're asking, would you like some Snickers? Do you want any? The question behind 18 is more of an implied sale, and you're asking, how many do you want to buy? It's a slight change, but can make all the difference when we're looking at decisions and buying behavior. So this next concept is one of relativity. We need comparisons to help us know what we want. We can't make a decision when there's just a one-off item. It's very difficult. And if I was to ask you, do you think this fish has a good life compared to other fish in bowls? You just see it by itself. It's hard to say. And then we see this other fish in a smaller bowl and you go, well, yeah, it's better than that fish. So that seems better, right? We can have those comparison points to help us make a decision. There's a really famous study that was done, and I know this might be looking a little bit blurry on your side, but I'm going to talk through everything here. This was done trying to encourage people to get subscriptions to The Economist. And so what we have here is they had digital only subscriptions for $59, print only for $125. And you could also get this bundle for the same $125 as the print only subscription. So they did a test to see what people would choose. You had 16 people pick the digital only. No one picks this ridiculous print only option, and 84 people choose the bundle. So you may think, hey, nobody wants print. It's this erroneous choice that we don't need. We should eliminate it. We can create some white space. Our teams don't have to worry about remembering whatever this product is. And so we'll go ahead and get rid of it. So they ran it again to see what would happen. And if you can see it here on the screen, maybe it even feels different already when you see it here. And so what happened was when they ran it again without that option, you had 68 people choose digital only and 32 picked the bundle. And remember, it was 84 the previous time. When you eliminated a choice that nobody wanted, it had a huge impact on the decision that they did make, even when you didn't change anything else about the other two options. And this is because of relativity and how we feel about a choice. If you were to be trying to choose a restaurant, this is actually a very difficult choice for people to make. In this case, if you have two options, one is closer to you and is 3 stars. The other is further away and is 5 stars. Trying to choose which one you would go to is very difficult, assuming that you have the means to pay and the time to go to either. And so adding in an additional choice can help nudge people one direction or another. In this case, when we add this 4-star restaurant that's a little bit further away, which restaurant, you can just shout out the number of stars, do you think most people end up picking?
5 stars.
5. Yep, I heard a lot of 5s. Very good. Yes. When we add in this 4-star, more people will pick the 5-star. What about in this case? We added this 2-star. Which option do we think most people choose now?
3.
Yes, 3. We picked this 3-star restaurant, and it's because of those comparison points. Know that all 4 restaurants are still there. And if you were to show them all, this is now another paradox of choice situation. There's too much to make a decision, and it's easier to just stick with whatever I've always done. So you want to know, again, what you want people to do and how you can showcase it and put all your eggs in that item's basket. You can think about the items that you're offering as sort of like the wingman for the thing that you're actually trying to sell. So if you're promoting the 5-star restaurant, the 4-star restaurant is your wingman that makes the 5-star look better and things like that. So I talked a little bit about nudges as we've gone here. And so I'm going to tell you more about what that means here as we go, as we look for areas that we can nudge people along the way. One of the big problems that we end up making in business or anytime we're trying to influence someone to make a decision is we're trying to get them to take too many steps at once. Remember those 35,000 decisions every day I was talking about, trying to get people to go from A to Z when you want to be looking at those little micro points. So if you were to think about, if you were doing an initiative with a business and you're trying to encourage people to buy your product, and one of many things that you do is that you send out a direct mail postcard or an email campaign or whatever that is. On your list of to-dos, you might say, okay, well, we sent the postcard and we even put, a QR code on there so we could track and we know if people bought from that or not. Good on us, we were tracking it. But there are lots of little moments within there, those small steps that have nudgeable points within them. So you actually need them to notice the postcard, to read it, to flip it over, be interested enough to not throw it away, to then go visit your website and read the homepage and not get distracted by Instagram or Netflix or someone else that they're talking to. You want them to click on the product page, the pricing page, put it in their cart, buy it. And from what I talked about with Amazon, then there's an extra bump in that process where they have to ask again instead of this, buy now button benefit. It's a lot of points where someone can kind of fall off the path that you're hoping they're going to stay on and make the wrong choice and leave. And you want to think about those small steps as these nudgeable moments where you might be able to keep them on the path. I like to think about it like if you go bowling and use bumpers, right? So you know where you want them to go, you're going to help them get there and kind of nudge them to stay on track as they go down the path. When we look at nudges, again, they don't have to be things that are huge. It can come from expecting error. If you think about where you don't if you forget to put on your seatbelt, your car is going to ding at you and make a noise because the manufacturers know that you probably wanted to wear your seatbelt and that's something you might have forgotten in the moment. And so it's going to provide you that feedback. Can't do it for everything, but that's something really important if you do forget it. And so they want to make sure that you know. That is a small nudge where they expected an error, gave you some feedback to help adjust the behavior. Another really interesting one is if you're trying to get people to take stairs instead of the elevator, so telling them, it's the healthy choice, thinking back to what I was talking about with throwing away garbage, that you want to, and it burns this many extra calories or whatever it is if you take the stairs. When you have those logical arguments, in the moment, I don't know that I want to do anything. Tomorrow, I'll take the stairs when I have a little bit more time. There's a concept, it's called hyperbolic time discounting. I like to call it the I'll start Monday effect, which as you think about, I'll start that diet on Monday, I'll start my paper on Monday, I'll do some research on Monday. And then, when Monday comes and it's time for the alarm to go off for you to go out and run or something that you're really excited about the night before, you think, I obviously didn't get good sleep last night. I'm going to get some more rest, take care of me, and tomorrow I'll start that. We do this all the time, right? And it may feel like you're a completely different person because studies have shown when we think about ourselves in the future, our brain actually lights up as if we're thinking or talking about a completely different person. It's really easy to commit future Melina to doing things because it's not me. But when the alarm goes off and I have to be the one to actually get up, I don't like that. So doing something now instead of thinking you'll do it Monday or tomorrow or 5 minutes from now can really help solidify that that's important. That's a nice little lesson for you. In the case of the elevator, though, telling people why it matters isn't likely going to nudge their behavior. In this particular study, they slowed down the elevator doors, but they took an extra 26 seconds to close. It's a long time if you're waiting for an elevator, and people felt inconvenienced and they naturally started to take the stairs because it felt like the better option. You didn't tell them it happened. It just felt like, why is this taking so long? And they took the stairs. And after the test was done, when they put the elevators back, and the doors at a normal pace, people kept taking the stairs because their status quo, their habit had been shifted and the subconscious had a new rule. So sometimes, again, change is easy when we think about it in these different ways and work with the rules of the brain. My last example here is one of opportunistic insurance fraud, which sounds super exciting, I'm sure. But when we think about insurance fraud, we likely think about these really over the top, long plotted situations. But really, when you're filling out the form and, back when you were going to be added to, say, your parents' insurance, and they knew that you were going to be the primary driver, but they said they would be because they knew the premium would be less. Or if you were filling it out and you said your computer was worth $1,000 when it's really worth more like $700. Those little tiny fibs are things that you do in the moment. It may not feel like that big of a deal, but it was costing the insurance industry in the UK £1 billion per year from these little tiny lies. You may think, as the insurance industry did, like, that's all great, but what do we even do? Like, what can we do to change that behavior? We're not going to call every single person. And you may think that you would have to have these large, expensive measures and more audits and more problems for people and bigger fines and whatever it is. But they worked with an agency that specialized in the behavioral sciences, who ran 18 different tests, including an honesty pledge. They had an option where people were told, understanding herding, that like 98% of people fill these out honestly. Hopefully you will too. And they also had one that used the priming for when you have to prove you're not a robot and go through the CAPTCHA. And in this case, they had to find choices that were related to honesty as a concept. And you've had to find buses and cars or whatever all the time. So many different things. Don't even think about it that much. What they found in their testing is that really all the 18 interventions had a positive impact, the least of which was like 5%, which, when we're talking about a free intervention on £1 billion problem, even 5% is a really good deal. But this is why it's important to run tests, even those simple A/B tests, like I was talking about with Netflix and things like that, is they all had some impact. And if you would have just said, yes, 5% lift, way to go, and left, or not done any testing at all and said, I bet it worked, right? Gut tells me it made a difference. But their most impactful nudge had a 74% impact on lying. So that's saving 700 plus billion pounds from a very simple thing, again, that didn't cost money. And, some were 50%, 35%, whatever it is. But if you don't run the tests, you don't know how much more impactful it could be. So it's important to do that. As you look at doing your own experiments when you're going off into the world, my recommendation being you want to keep it small. So don't try to test big, giant things. If anybody's having to write a thesis, same thing. They'll tell you need a smaller concept, a smaller thing to look at. You want to be really thoughtful about what you're doing. All of what I've been talking about here, understanding the problem, what do you want people to do and why, thinking enough about what nudges and concepts would tie into it. And then you can test really often. You don't want to test everything because it would be a big waste of time, but you want to test the right things often enough and evaluate and see how it's impacting behavior. And just like if we think back to behavioral baking, where when you open your little shop and you may feel comfortable making all the birthday cakes in the world, when it comes to the wedding cake, you would hire a professional maybe to do that, someone else, because it's a one-time thing. When you go off into industry, when there's a lot on the line, use a partner, someone that's an expert in the hundreds of concepts and things of the brain to make sure that all goes well when it's the £1 billion problem, things like that. So talked about a lot of concepts. I've got a little recap slide here, and the numbers off to the side are corresponding episodes of the Brainy Business podcast. All of these have chapters dedicated to them within the book, which I'm not sure if everybody got a copy when you came, but that's available there as well. So framing being how you say something matters more than what you're saying. Herding and social proof, we're influenced by people like us, and you want to make sure your herds are working for you. Priming and what happens first matters a lot. What happens just before the decision. With anchoring and adjustment, understanding your numbers, you can use big ones. I put here, throwing out some big numbers because more often than not, we use none or small ones because it feels scary. Relativity, using a decoy or that wingman item, and then understanding nudges to help people make the best choice. I like to say that properly applied behavioral economics will allow you to be throwing darts while your competitors are still throwing noodles. So this is an option to have some better opportunity as you're working into the future. And we saved a few minutes here for questions. So happy to answer any and all questions that you have in the, like 10 minutes.
Well, I have a lot of questions, but I want to make sure that the students and the others here get their questions answered first. And so I'll just sit up here and just in case there's any problems with the audio. Did anything come to mind while you're watching this? Did it spark any curiosity or some ideas? What do you think?
Specifically regarding priming and anchoring, that seemed somewhat deceptive at first, especially to someone who's not versed in this kind of line of business or something like that. Does it occur often that it is used more to do harm in market economy or something like that, where different companies are competing and you're having sales meetings and stuff like that? Does it turn out to have more of a negative outcome rather than a positive outcome because of the way that it is utilized?
Sure. So believe it or not, this question comes up almost any time any of us are speaking on the topic. And just as with any knowledge that exists in the world, bad people will use any knowledge for bad things. And thankfully, the world is filled with mostly good people. And so we see more often than anything else, people looking for positive ways to influence behavior. In the field of behavioral economics, we only work in nudges, which I was talking about there, in that free choice is always available. So you are not required to do anything. If you're working in regulation and forced items for people to be doing, that's outside of really the behavioral sciences and what we look to do within a nudge, and that you want to make it so people can make their own choice in whatever they're needing. So it's not the 18 Snickers for someone that has a peanut allergy or that doesn't want Snickers bars or doesn't like them. It's not like, it's a zombie and you have to buy them or whatever that is. But it can influence the likelihood of a choice. The thing to know is if you don't think about it, so if you were to say like, no, I'm going to have nothing to do with this. I don't want this responsibility. I'm just going to make it so people can choose whatever they would want naturally, so they can know what would be the best choice for them. What you saw when I talked about relativity is the best choice and what people want changes based on the way information is presented to them. And whether you think about it or not, when you put options out in front of people, it will be influencing their behavior. And you very likely, if you're not thinking about it, are nudging people to make a worse decision than they would have if you would have been more thoughtful in the way that you present that information. We call that choice architecture. And so considering the choice, being a steward, a better architect of that information is the best way to help encourage people to make better choices.
I really feel like the person who made the elevator doors take longer, I feel like that was a bad person. I'm sorry. I love
a monster. Yes.
That's a good question. Anyone else have something that, sparked during the discussion or something you're curious about? Yes, Steve.
Yeah, I know I'm not a student, sorry, but you guys are being quiet. I had the opportunity to listen to your podcast, a couple episodes.
Thank you.
It's really good. If we've got some podcast junkies, I suggest it's very well produced as well, which I appreciate. There was an episode on 42 courses where you talked a little bit about pricing. And I thought that was really interesting. Like there's some counterintuitive stuff with respect to picking a price. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I have many thoughts on pricing. And so, yes, with the person from 42 courses, his name is Chris Rawlinson, started that organization. They've got some really great classes. but we were talking about, I have a course on pricing strategy. That's just a virtual course that's available. I also teach a class on pricing and product development at Texas A&M. And so there's a whole lot that comes into pricing, but the main thing being that pricing is typically never about the price, but the things that happen before the price are more important than the price itself. I have a framework I talk about in this called It's Not About the Cookie. And so if you imagine we're walking down the street and we're having a great conversation, we smell this amazing scent in the air, and we're maybe a little bit distracted trying to find the source that we can tell there are cookies baking and want to find them. And then we see that there's a line outside and we feel compelled to go wait. And then, we're in the line and they give us a free sample and say, today only buy 3, get 1 free. And before we know it, we walk out eating a cookie and with a bag for later. Similar situation, we're walking down the street, same conversation, and someone comes up and shoves a flyer in our faces and says, today only, if you buy 4 cookies, you only pay for 3 of them. And, I've got samples, and shoves it in our faces and go, ugh, like that guy, like, doesn't he, how rude is he? Why would we want that? We see the line, we smell the cookies, we pity the people there saying we would never buy from them and are going on to Yelp to write about their bad sales tactics. All the same things happened. Maybe you recognize some of the concepts there in priming and framing. But we felt very differently about it. In the first scenario, we were going to buy the cookies. It didn't really matter how much they were, and we were definitely not buying them in the other, regardless. They could have been the same cookies. The first ones could have been $3. The other one's 50 cents a piece, but it didn't matter to a limit, right? If they were $100 each, we're probably like, meh, like, I'm not buying those cookies no matter what, right? But again, the price isn't about the price, the way we feel about it and whether our subconscious is drawn in or not, and bringing us to feel compelled to buy is about the things that happen before the price more than the price itself, which is why we have to understand the problem, and it's often not price.
So yeah, to play off that just a little bit, selfishly, something I've been thinking about during the presentation is my class. And of course, I think the classroom is a great lab for this sort of work. And so I'm wondering, given the content that you teach, is your syllabus or your course shell, do you think it's been affected by, I think primarily framing comes to mind. I mean, are you thinking about framing when you deliver your course as a product? And, anyway, thoughts on that?
Yes, definitely. I'm always thinking about all the concepts and how they come into play. But even just if you think about an individual lecture, right, or when you're doing a presentation, in the case of what the goal is of the presentation itself, or when I'm doing a podcast episode or writing an article or whatever, is that I want you to learn the information enough to remember and feel compelled to go take an action in a responsible way that you can go and apply what you learned. I could have just spewed a bunch of facts and talked about stats and research in a way that was very boring and that nobody wanted to listen to, but that wouldn't help anybody. You wouldn't be going to take the action. The reason that I do the penguins and polar bears, or we talk about going in to buy ground beef, and then I introduce what the concept was, is for you to experience it. You saw people around you experience it. I make sure that you name and claim numbers on the penguins and polar bears, because if you just think it in your brain, and then when I reveal, what it actually is, you'll have this moment where you go, I bet I would have been close to that. Right? You were nowhere near in your mind, but because you didn't have to say it aloud, it didn't impact you the same way as, experiencing that as a group. And again, I have an intention for that. And so that goes into everything, whether it's creating the syllabus, the way that I present, that the class is even available for people to sign up for it, the name of it, all the things. Yes.
Very good. Very good. Any other questions? I think we're getting close to time, but somebody have been holding back a little bit, have something to ask?
I will say, feel free if anybody, I know there's a lot that I just shared and potentially you're going to decompress. And if you have a question to follow up with, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, just Melina Palmer there, or you can send me an email, melina@thebrainybusiness.com. Happy to follow up and answer questions.
Yeah, and having the book is a great chance to kind of decompress and add some structure to what's been delivered today. And it's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you for your time and for the wonderful content. I think that probably, if we're careful, all of us have gotten something we can take away from this and improve our outcomes, whether it's a business or our class performance or our relationships. Thank you so much, and I'll be in touch.
Thanks so much. Have a wonderful day, everybody.